Right, welcome Mike, welcome Ida. This is an episode of CIFF Media called Italian Fashion, Nordic Style, and it's part of a collaboration between the Italian Trade Agency and the Copenhagen International Fashion Fair. Before introducing you to our audience, I'm going to take a little time to explain why we are here today. So I'm Matteo Augello, I'm a fashion historian. I was born in Italy, work in London, and I've been collaborating with the Italian Trade Agency, the Italian Culture Institute, to help promote Italian fashion and think about the role of Italian fashion in the international panorama of fashion. And the Italian Trade Agency is a governmental agency that supports small and medium-sized companies in Italy entering foreign markets. It helps to connect foreign markets, foreign actors with Italian agents, and the idea is to provide information, assistance, consulting, promotion, and training, as well as attracting foreign investments in Italy. It is quite a big institution. It's got almost 80 offices across 74 countries, and it is established as a gateway for enterprises that are willing to establish business relationships with Italian partners, from sourcing Italian products to investment opportunities in Italy. Very important words that I've got to read. So together with CIFF, we have decided to devise this project called Weaving Futures as an initiative to address the profound changes that are taking place in the industry today. For example, the upcoming ban on destruction on unsold inventory coming from the EU, and a directive, I think, in July 2026. And it requires rethinking current practices and forging new synergies. That are the two principles that we want to explore with two podcasts and a capsule collection between a Swedish manufacturing company, Noms, a Finnish designer, and mine, with Italian textiles, showing how collaborations between different countries can help us finding new ways of working in the future. And so the idea really that the Italian Trade Agency had with this project was to foster conversation between Italian and Nordic players in the market. And they asked me, as a person who loves to talk and ask questions, and then we asked you as the perfect guest to help us navigate this theme. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you. So Mike Bjørnbæk, did I nail?
Yeah, perfect.
So you're the womenswear buyer at Magazine here in Copenhagen. You have almost 10 years experience. You worked in wholesale, PR, e-commerce, and now you're managing relationship with around 60 different brands, which is a pretty impressive cohort.
Thank you.
And then Ida Petersson, who are the co-founder of the Good X agency, as well as a former buy director of Browns London, and as well as the owner of many different hats in many different contexts that I'm sure we get to hear throughout this podcast. And so what we'll be talking about today is an exploration of Italian and Nordic fashion industries with a focus on Copenhagen and the Danish market. And I would like to start by exploring Italian fashion identity. I did a lot of work on how Italian companies have tried to market themselves using fashion curation. And the question that I dread all the time is, what is Italian fashion for you? So now it's my turn to ask the dreaded question. And Ida, would you like to start?
Sure. Italian fashion to me is foremost creativity. I think some of the most amazing, talents, and going back to the formation of Italy, people have always been inspired by the Italian way and the craftsmanship. And I think that's the second part of Italianship to me as well, is really that craftsmanship, like the beautiful tradition of manufacturing that Italy has, and this kind of idea of something that is, not just fashionable, but also has longevity and quality. So yeah, that's Italian fashion to me.
Sounds like a good starting point. Yeah. Does that align, Mike, with what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think so. Also, as like a Scandinavian who is only a tourist in Italian fashion, didn't grow up in it. I think from our perspective, it's also so closely tied into the way of life in Italy. There's this more fun approach and boundary pushing in a way than we see here in Scandinavia. I think there's still room for fun here, but it's done in a very different way. And I think that's very admirable. But yeah, I mean, made in Italy is such a thing of high quality and craftsmanship. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. But yeah, I think we're very aligned on our opinions.
So I guess the Made in Italy marketing campaign that started in the 80s really played out.
Wonders. Great work.
Go Italy.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, when I talk about Italian fashion history, and you know, it started kind of usually in the 1950s. That's when they associate the development of a structured industry, although there were previous examples. I always tell students or you know, whoever I'm talking to that at the time Italy could not compete with Paris over fashionability. And so the thing that they could win over them was on Italianness. If it was about who was more fashionable, Paris had this very strong heritage. And although Italian craftsmanship was, you know, brilliant, it was cheaper, and buyers would get high fashion in Italy. What really sold the country or the fashion system was the ready-made kind of cruise collection, high quality, but selling that lifestyle, you know, selling Italy as almost as a commodity. Let's go to Rome, to Capri, to the resort, and have a great time and looking colorful and wearing great garments. And there has been a lot of discussion, I think, on whether Made in Italy is still standing, whether the idea of craftsmanship. I think all of the companies are now being questioned. I mean, not just in Italy, but everywhere, about how they produce, the percentage of what they produce in a specific country. But somewhat, if you look at where the luxury brands are producing, Italy is still a central point. You spend a lot of time in Italy, Ida. So this reputation is still standing, the manufacturers, the quality.
Yeah, it definitely is. There was like a little kind of survey where people started exploring, and I mean, they still obviously do produce a lot and outside of Italy. But I think what has been really lovely very recently is that actually people that did move their production from Italy have started to return to Italy. And I think there's still this, when someone really wants that high quality, and I think also in a way, I'm not going to say traditional way, but this beautiful generational production facilities in Italy that they really build like relationships with their brands as well. And I have so many amazing stories from brands that I worked with over the years where they make friends with the owners and they become part of the family and like kind of adopted into it. And I think that kind of relationship is more meaningful today than ever. And I think, you know, customers maybe don't pay the same attention anymore to a label, but there is still that, like, if something says made in Italy, you know it's going to last. That is like just a mark, a seal of approval almost in fashion industry and beyond, of course, because we are still a little bubble in fashion that we sometimes forget. We think that we are the world, but actually, you know, the real customer is the one who is not in our world.
That is true. Like, I mean, fashion is everywhere in the world. It's just that the fashion industry perhaps
we take things very seriously. Yes. As we should do. It's our world.
No, all of the time. And then I want to know, Mike, if you spend time in Italy, if you attend fashion shows, or for example, like the Milan Fashion Week is still considered one of the main fashion weeks, but there are also satellite events, rather events that are taking place at the same time. For example, there's White in Milan. Are there any of these events that you always attend or that you try to explore, scouting for new brands?
Yeah, we've been to Mipal a couple times. Don't know if I'm saying it right, but I've said it like that for 2 years now, so I'm not going to change it.
Look at the Italian, yeah. I was like, I don't know.
But we've been there a couple times. We work very closely with an Italian agency for the production of a lot of our private label, which is just how you described it, a very close relationship. When I went there the first time, I thought, this is just going to be a business trip. Came back, I was like, oh, this was almost a vacation.
Oh,
Yeah, so cute and a really good relationship. But we went to Mipal with them to explore, as we wanted to extend our leather goods within our private label. So yeah, and it's connected to Mikam, the shoe fair, right?
very familiar.
Yeah.
My
So
nightmare.
It is very big.
It's so big. I mean, I say nightmare is the wrong word. It's just so gigantic that you'd
Yes.
just be lost for days in
Yeah.
like these airport hangars, and there would just be like just shoes coming at you.
That's where I'm okay with CIFF because I've been here so many times. But the first time you come, it is overwhelming.
Yeah.
But we've done have many great experiences with it, and it's a great way of exploring your options. Also because it's so, I think when people think of leather goods made in Italy, it's very much a certain type, and oh boy, was I wrong. Like you can get everything, any type, any price point, and I think that was really good for us as well, to explore, as we're more of a democratic price point than a luxury price point.
Yeah, that there are very, overwhelming, daunting sometimes this fair, but yeah, I guess they show the breadth of what Italian manufacturers can provide, and I think one of the greatest strength of the Italian manufacturing industry, textiles, leather, in the broader sense, was this ability to be flexible and adapt to different levels of customer requirements. The small and medium-sized company allowed that flexibility. Sometimes it poses the challenges in long-term running of the business, but it's what has allowed this relationship. And I mean, what you were describing when people go to Italy, I'm a popular culture thinker. I always try to remind myself. Not everybody reads fashion magazines, but everybody watches TV series. Like where most people get ideas on fashion is not fashion magazines. It used to be perhaps, but it's how these narratives on Italian fashion travel. And I was so excited to discover that Emily of Parisian fame was not going to Milan, which is considered the center of the industry, but was going to Rome, and then the boyfriend is this, small boutique company inspired by specific ones. But I'm going into the village. I'm going to have lunch in the square. It's still to this day capturing this idea of what an Italian company looks like. That sense of trust, I guess, comes from imagining a company as a family, and a lot of these companies are still run by family. Do you think that this personability, this affective quality, perhaps, is also why there could be attraction to Italian brands?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in an industry that is competitive, I think there's nothing more important than personal relations. I think that's how we as humans function, but also how you drive a good business is making sure that the people and the brands and the manufacturers that you work with, that you have a good relationship. And I think if you're able to create that with someone, I think you can have a more frugal partnership in the long run. I think it's very important.
And what would you say are the aspects of Italian fashion in the way that we might understand it generally by its popularity, what we associate with it? Which aspects of Italian fashion might appeal to Danish fashion consumers?
I think there's, I mean, that's a very open question, but I think there's a laid backness that we admire. I don't think that's what the Scandis are best at. Do you not agree? I think we take ourselves a bit more seriously sometimes, and I think that's something, at least, that I admire.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, there's so much passion in I mean, having gone to Italy so many times over the last 30 years in a very privileged way, I think, I mean, what you spoke about, that's kind of feeling of kind of being welcome. The Italian brands are the perfect hosts. You come there, they take care of you, they always serve the best lunches. It was always
long ones too.
Yeah, and even to the, there's here's a glass of wine. It's I can't drink during lunchtime, then I need to go and have a nap. But they really sort of create this, it's a fully immersive experience. And I think in one way, they said, I guess there is a laid backness in Italy, but to me, it's probably more serious than because they really, there's so much, in a wonderful way, pride. So there's a seriousness around it as well. And obviously the businesses in Italy, these are many times really some of the biggest, brands in the world. So there's also, there has to be a seriousness because this is, multi-billion, dollar companies. And, you have to, think about every aspect of that. And I think sometimes actually I sort of find, in a way, particularly here in Denmark, that there is a kind of tongue-in-cheek, sort of maybe more fun way of seeing fashion sometimes, because it's it's not that it's less serious, but it's maybe because, it's smaller. So therefore there's a little bit more of a looseness, whereas in Italy, I think there is, even for maybe Italy is not, Scandinavians are very known for the sort of pragmatic, systematic building shelves and, etc. in, a very formulated way. But there is still this kind of structure and tradition and acknowledgement of hierarchy in Italy that is more loose here in Scandinavia, I would say.
Yeah, that's a very interesting city of hierarchy. You mean in the industry or more socially? Where would you perceive it?
In everything, and I think that goes down to just daily life. There's maybe a different kind of acknowledgement of the elderly and kind of, I guess being together as a whole family. Whereas I think sometimes in Scandinavia we tend to sort of almost segment ourselves in different kind of groups and age brackets. And it's not so much about let's all get together and here is the little toddler up to the 90-year-old grandma, and they all kind of hanging out together, and whether they are watching football or cooking or just sitting in the village square and drinking an aperitivo. Whereas here you see more okay, here's all the young guys, and then we have the middle-aged people, and then you have the little old people together. I don't know.
No, I think it's true. Especially there's a different, I think, response to or a different prominence or a greater prominence of the elderly as fashionable. Especially Italian nonnas they're everywhere on TikTok and Instagram, and they're the Milanese shura. These ladies, I mean, they have really become a central piece in fashion communication there. I think generally in the world or in the industry, in the beauty industry, there is greater representation of 70 plus people. Yeah. But thankfully, and
they're so chic. That's why I love when you walk around, whether you're in Rome or Venice, Milan, wherever you are. You see, everyone is chic. There's so much thought going into that everyday uniform, which I really admire. I mean, I'm obviously wow, the fact that you'd put on this 3-piece suit and it's not just during Pitti, it's actually, just a regular Tuesday morning. I think that's really amazing and fascinating for me. And I think you can even see that, to your point, in social media, but even how when street style photographers are coming to Milan, a lot of them, end up taking photos of these super chic people that are just not actually fashion people. And I think that's it's inspiring.
It's so interesting. I don't know if you've watched Devil Wears Prada too, but they got so many people to audition to be present in the film, and a lot of these people that dressed what they thought would be fashionable, but it was a very distorted idea, I think, of a fashionable personality, which is the one exactly that you're, and it's a sort of like an instinct about appearance that, I mean, is actually nurtured over time. But so now let's taking a different approach, or looking conversely at this region. And you're Swedish. You spend so much time here in Copenhagen too, so I think you're very well placed to point out the differences. But what I wanted to start is my Italian perspective. We've always associated Denmark and the Nordic countries with sustainable circular fashion. That's what we seem to be striving for, and that seems to be so intrinsic to the way that you think about garments and textiles. Where are what are these roots coming from?
I mean, I think then we have to sort of go way back in history. I mean, I think part of the reason why we have such a love of like preserving and taking care of, not just ourselves. It's very commonly known that obviously the happiest people in the world are in the Nordics, and they have a very healthy like life-work balance. But I think the reality is like we live in one of the regions where there's a very harsh climate. There's very long, very dark winters, and the reality is to survive, people had to really pay attention to the environment. And, that tradition, I think, is so embedded in our genes, like since, Stone Age, the Vikings, like everything going into like, how do we, live through the darkness to then, re-enter into these wonderful like summer months when everyone forgets about, the fact that darkness is coming back and you're out sort of surviving. I think that kind of comes into that, whether that is like, sorting out your rubbish into different kind of recycling bins and being like very, glass recycling to clothes recycling, or even like, obviously to what's becoming now and has become, thankfully, a thing, the sustainable part of fashion. I think what's interesting to me actually was that it took longer than I would have thought for that sustainability to really enter fashion as a whole. It was like a very long time where, especially in luxury fashion, it was, kind of not, it was hard for people to do it well, and technology wasn't quite there to make it fashionable. So it was a little bit more like kind of hippie-esque scene. That's, I think, I mean, Scandinavia obviously been very driving in that kind of progression. And I think that's also why, that association and with the work that like Cecilia Torsmarken has done with Copenhagen Fashion Week and really kind of focusing on that, but really also because the reality is when it comes to fashion, it can't just be well made in a sustainable way. It also has to have a point of view. And I think that's where the Danes and the Scandis in general really kind of come to play here in Copenhagen during Fashion Week and obviously beyond that. And that kind of celebrating creativity whilst also, taking a serious view of what do we do and what are we bringing to the, to the world? Because there is obviously a very, big consideration to be made with this kind of like churning out of new collections constantly. And the reality is that, the pile of clothes that exists is like we could dress ourselves till the end of times already. So, having that kind of thoughtful thinking about, yes, we want to look good and we want to feel great, but we also need to, hand over the earth to the next generations. And I think that's like a very sort of back to that thing of being very embedded in our genes of like, being like very democratic and making sure that everyone, whether it's gender equality or just, the political sides of things, which I'm not going to go into because I know that's not the best subject always, but I think, that goes into the fashion world as well.
Yeah, there's intention is required really now in a holistic perspective, not just sustainability in specific portions of the production, but I think taking this an overall view and applying this principle everywhere, it's easier for a culture for whom these values have been embedded rather than others that are having to integrate it and so are starting from one part and then forgetting the others. But it's moving, like it is slowly and gradually shaping that there are no other options if we want to keep going.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, like sustainable production, but also like innovation, I think is probably one of the most exciting areas. Because the reality is there's, only so many silhouettes and shapes you can kind of progress in, because, they kind of being, there's not so much that can come that is new. But what is new is actually these ways of doing things or producing and finding, exciting materials, whether they are from just like 3D printing to, seaweed. I think that's really fantastic, and then it becomes like the most amazing garments. It's incredible.
Or bacteria derived,
exactly.
Or mushroom leather.
Yeah.
And I think one of my favorite time in Italian history is connected to during the fascist regime, which is not one of my favorite time in Italian history, but because of the self-sufficiency regime, companies like famously Ferragamo were really exploring alternatives, but even the textile industry doing, artificial fibers starting from lactose, for example, that have been reprised to explore new strategies.
Also, the Gucci handle the bamboo handle on the Gucci bags, I learned was out of necessity more than innovation, because you needed to down adjust your usage of leather, which is very cool and something that's still now iconic to the brand, right?
Very much so, yeah. And it's actually then there are so many bamboo handles and way beyond that particular brand. And I actually wanted to ask you, as a foreigner, to introduce me to Copenhagen. Like, what would you say is the fashion system here? If you had to give a 2-minute brief introduction to, I like hard questions. Sorry,
no pressure. It's a very short time for a big question, but I think, like you were talking about, sustainability before. I think it's become such an integral part of especially the Copenhagen fashion scene. I think it used to be quite a trendy thing, but it's now become more of a norm than a marketing stunt. You can find so many vintage shops around here that you wouldn't know necessarily are vintage shops, because they're so well curated and the experience is so much more. You can also find shops that are just piles of clothes that you can dig through, but it's now such an integral part of the scene here, which I think is really cool. It's obviously a tough time for a lot of businesses right now, and I think we can feel that. But this, I hate this word, but community has become such a big part of branding and the way that brands associate with or interact with their customers. So you'll see, run clubs, on breakfast clubs, on breakfast and run clubs around Copenhagen. So many pop-ups with sports brand who does little run clubs to create a society, or there's a cute brand in Christianshavn that did like a little paint workshop in the morning. Like, all these things that are like creating community is a huge part of the industry now. And I think it's so fun to explore, because it's, again, that, like we talked about before, it's so much more the human relation that you're counting on. Also because I know that young customers are notoriously not very loyal. So I think it's also an attempt to build a bit more loyalty and stability. But it's I would say the main thing right now in I think in every city, fashion city, but especially in Copenhagen right now, community is so important.
You were fishing for this when you said, "I hate this word," using this word. But
I do.
Why do you?
Because I think it is very overused, and everyone, like, and not to say anything bad about anyone, but like everyone now has a community manager hired, which makes sense because it's such an integral part of marketing. But it's just such a common thing. So I just meant that I hated saying it because it's not a very original
I see.
thought. Yeah. I didn't reinvent the wheel here by saying this. No, it's more that it's quite obvious, especially in Copenhagen now, that this is so important. But good for all the community managers.
Yeah, no, this is true. It's become more formulative. I actually think one of the things, having attended like Copenhagen Fashion Week for like it's over 10 years now, and then being more involved in it in recent years, I think one of the things that, and obviously I have this like weird hat where I'm from Scandinavia, but I spent 30 years away from Scandinavia.
Mm-hmm. You got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. I sometimes say that I'm like in the middle of the sea somewhere. Like I'm not Swedish, I'm not English. I don't know what I am. But I think what people fall in love with, and I think why Copenhagen. I mean, not just because of the talents, but one of the reasons why it's become this kind of like unofficial fifth fashion city. Is really because people feel so welcome, and the artists. There's always been a community feeling in the Danish brands. I think in the most beautiful way that you always felt a bit actually like Italy, like you're coming into these like family. Whether that was like when Ganni started out, like Dita and Nikolai would have this like amazing dinners at their house. Like they would just invite like the world, let's come hang out. We'll just like put some tables up in the garden and just hang out and talk about things, like, which is actually quite Italian, I think, in a way. But it was always just very, I'm sure there was super organized in the background, but it always felt very natural. And, I think, yeah. And I think like, I guess like there's this no surprise that like Panomal Studios, which obviously is an incredible brand, outside of like Rafa, that obviously also is incredible, but like they really came with this intention of like the community, the cyclists, and kind of then beyond, and created this movement that like went into fashion as well, and made we bought it at Browns, but people like the Mr. Porters and the Americans and all the big players were like, okay, wow, we need to really take notice of this feeling, and that's in a way like the running clubs and so on as well. But of course, then when it becomes this, as with anything, when something is successful and someone sees something work and they're like, okay, yeah, let's copy that, let's copy that. And I think where it works well is when there is an authenticity in it, and when it feels like it really is an extension of the brand. Yeah. And whether that is like, I mean, like Rotate, like I love how like Janelle and Tora, they just like, it's parties and having fun, and just like you go to any Rotate event and you're like, I love this, because you can just feel the happiness and, just, I don't know, feeling of like, okay, we obviously this is a serious business, but we're also having fun whilst we're doing it. You
can also do karaoke with Lisa Rinna.
Exactly, exactly. And who doesn't want to do that?
Exactly, yeah. It was the best night of my life.
Oh, it's awesome.
I need a minute to process my envy right now. Thank you. Then I'm sure it was a great night. I don't have that. I have great night with collectors, maybe textile collectors in Italy, but that's all, drawers and wonderful historical clothes in there, unassumingly, but it doesn't win against karaoke with Lisa Rinna, I'm afraid.
It's a bit more niche.
It is indeed. I do have I think this aspect of community also. We used to talk about corporate social responsibility as a side hustle, and then in fact, it's a given. Like, I also think, coming from a public institutional perspective, there is less and less money that is provided to cultural institutions, I think, in different countries. And so because private companies are the ones that have perhaps greater possibilities of funding those, a lot of community activities that are fostering communities are actually coming from private, and there is so much potential of doing marketing while also creating cultural value, that I see that a lot in exhibition and curatorial processes, and And I mean, this is something that you used to see in the 50s or in the 60s in Italy, in the so-called age of enlightened entrepreneurship, where big companies would then create a sense of welfare for all of the village people within a village. You know, you've been to these cities that are led by one company, but then the city of that village is connected to it. But there was another thing that I wanted to ask, to check my foreigner perspective. Is there a Danish way of looking at fashion? Is it different from the Swedish way of looking at fashion? What are the differences? What comes to mind, at least to you both?
I mean, I definitely, what I love about it is that actually, I think sometimes people put us all in one basket, and there's this view of like, okay, Scandinavian minimalism. And obviously that is very true. And there's, you know, a real long-standing tradition of, you know, amazing brands doing that incredibly well. But I think, you know, when I look at, like, if I isolate like Sweden and Denmark, for example, which are probably like the ones that have the most fashion brands out of the Nordic countries, but I don't want to exclude anyone.
You really threw one under the bus, huh?
Sorry. But you know, I think in Sweden it's much more kind of like a pack mentality. You know, people will dress, you know, very well, but it's much more kind of minimalistic and understated. And you know, again, you know, like I mean, obviously the world of acne now has expanded way beyond something that is clean cut, but it very much started out as like these, like, you know, denims with the flame and, like, you know, great you know, uniform wardrobing, and then, you know, obviously Johnny has like really grown that universe. But Totem, for example, obviously, which is like one of the biggest brands in the world, you know, continue to kind of reinvent and envision this like minimalism. Whereas I feel like, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm from the south of Sweden, and one of the reasons why I always did my shopping in Copenhagen, because for me the eclecticness that's here, I think, like, you know, from like Stina Goya that I work with, who has like such a beautiful way of like interpreting, like, you know, her love of art and prints and colors and, you know, madness into these beautiful creations, to like Cecilia Banson's like just dreamlike, just like beyond beautiful. But then, you know, on the other side of that, you got like, you know, NN07 or Bjørnbæk or MF Pen that just like, you know, put menswear a little bit like on its head. And I think that's what you know, I have a personal love for Copenhagen for that reason, because it's very individual. I think the Swedish is like more stylish, actually quite similar. I always feel like when I'm in Stockholm, I get a bit of a Milan vibe when I go there, in terms of like how people sort of dress, or even like the look of the restaurants and so on. And in Copenhagen, it feels like it's a bit more like a Lower East Side, maybe a little bit of like a East London kind of vibe as well, in terms of like there's a grittiness to it. It's like just a little bit more like, okay, you know, this is me and this is my, you know, my uniform. And, you know, you have these trends that kind of like actually come from, you know, this like whole thing about like Danish fashion, right? The international fashion community is like really into, and that's where like all the big magazines send people here, and this like the biggest street style photographers in the world come here during Fashion Week, because they get really inspired about the way that people throw things together.
It's maybe a bit more experimental,
Yeah,
I
definitely.
would say, than Swedish. Yeah, I mean, we have online presence in Sweden and Norway, so I have like a lot of data on what sells. I still don't know. I don't know. I don't see a red thread. But yeah, no, I completely agree. Really see your point, that Copenhagen is definitely a bit more experimental, and I think you're also talking into, like, you mentioned TikTok, but like all these micro trends that come up. As a buyer, that's kind of difficult to navigate because they are over and done so fast. But we can really see it that people are really fast at adapting trends and trying out new things, which is so refreshing in a way. Maybe not the most sustainable thing, but it is, if you are walking down the street, quite refreshing.
Yeah. I mean, I've always loved it here. It's a bit how I, you know, like my first experience of going to Fashion Week, because I'm old, like there was no social media, there was no coverage, and essentially like the kind of normal world wouldn't actually know what was shown at these shows or in the showroom until, like, you know, the seasonal issue came out. It's like the September issue, and obviously these things, to your point earlier, have like a little bit lost that kind of impact, because today you consume, even if you're not there in person, you can watch the show live. You see all the the social, like whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Substack now or whatever it is. Like people just it's there and then, right? But I think you get into this space of just being inspired, where people are dressing from their wardrobe, because I think sometimes, and this goes for all fashion weeks, and it's I can see it happening here a little bit as well, where people come and they're dressed in like look 15 or look 21 or whatever, and I think what made me fall in love with fashion was just that individuality in creating something. Of course, you're going to be your best version of you, right? Because you're like on display, and today more than ever. But I think it's still this kind of thing in Copenhagen, and maybe that goes back also to what you said, which I think is like a general trend anyways. Like, it's not that the fashion world is shrinking in terms of like, although like if you look at the figures, it looks like it is, but actually it's because the second-hand vintage market is growing so immensely. And I think like most young people are like, even if they have the financial means, they prefer to like source like an old Margiela or like, vintage Ismiyake or, whatever, because that's unique and individual.
It's also so easy now.
Yeah.
And you can never underestimate the adrenaline of finding something that if it's a better find when it's secondhand, because it feels like there's a much bigger different pricing, there's a much bigger I guess pool of options that you can look at. I think you've pointed out quite a few elements that may be in common with Italy as well, and I was wondering whether there are any aspects of your perception of Italian fashion or the communication of brands that could clash perhaps with the sensitivity of fashion consumers here.
Oh, good question.
I think clash is maybe the wrong word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think we talked about this earlier, and I think and I was thinking about that. It's like when I talked about like when you walk and people, it's like I think it's a bit more tailored. Like, which is not so much maybe the Scandinavian, a little bit more the Swedish way, but even then it's not as like button up maybe that a lot of Italy is. Like there's like maybe that more seriousness in the outfit, and you still wear a suit to the office, which it doesn't so much is, even in like banking here, yes, like they maybe have like the tech bro, like gilet and shirt and stuff, but it's like maybe not the full suit and tie. So maybe, not clash, but that's maybe the difference.
Is it maybe also more of a respect for tradition? Like, I feel like there's here, I mean, especially the new generation, there's not a lot of that. Like, this is how we used to do it. And you mentioned earlier with the respect for elders as well, that you sort of like, you do things a certain way and that's how it's done. I think these, especially the Danish young people, too lazy to do that. They're doing it their own way. Maybe a bit entitled as well. This generation, myself included, but I think that might like be one of them actually. That it is quite different. But I think I think the suit banking is a great example because it is hard to find someone on the metro in a suit and tie. Yeah, it could be because the tie gets lost before.
It's so interesting that before you were saying, I guess there's an easiness to Italy. Perhaps we take ourselves more seriously, but when it comes to fitting and cutting, it's the other way around. There's a rigor or hierarchy perhaps embedded in the tailoring, in the cut of garments that is not present here. Okay, I want to now explore your experience as buyer, as non-negotiables for you as buyers. Like if you're thinking about, I mean, your work at magazine that has such an extensive and outstanding history. I went to see the little museum display. You've got 150 years soon. So it comes with, I guess, even heritage in the buying selection and your customers. What do you always have to consider when buying for a magazine?
That the customers come first, above everything. I think we're privileged enough where our positioning is also inspirational and not only as a sales channel. People will also come to Magasin for a stroll, not necessarily to purchase something. Hopefully they do. But we are in a place where we also have to be a bit inspirational. So I think the main thing when we buy is making sure that the customers fall in love with the products as much as I do. There's no better feeling than seeing a new collection from a brand that you love. It's the best feeling in the world. And I want the clothes to communicate. That sounds very naive, but I hope that the customers feel like there is a curation to the product and there is a journey throughout it, making sure that everyone can find something and no one is excluded from the offering that we have. We are 7 places in Denmark. Oh, I might be wrong about that. But we are in Denmark and widely distributed, and we are for everyone. There shouldn't be a Dane who can't find something in Magasin. And I think that's important to remember that we are buying for everyone. Yeah.
That sounds a responsibility, but also you seem so excited. You know,
I
about,
love
like,
it. Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
It's very so nice to hear. And Ida, you were buying director for Browns in London. That it's literally on history books for how we shape the way that we think about London fashion identity. Really, how and then now you're also supporting brands, mentoring them on, I guess, the other side, you know, getting selected by the brand. If for brands that want to enter the Nordic markets, what would you think they need to have in order to respond to the consumer needs?
I mean,
Just give all your good advice away for free.
Exactly. I'm like, can I charge for this? No, I will answer it in a very general way.
Just give us the free trial version.
I think, you know, and then this is not specific to the Scandinavian market, but it's to any market, you know, like you have to do your research. Like you have to understand the end consumer and what they buy and how they shop. And I think in Scandinavia specifically, price and quality are incredibly important. Like we do put value on something being well made, but price is a consideration. We are very price conscious, and I think there's no surprise that so many of the brands that are, like, pretty much every Scandinavian brand is quite well priced, and it sits in a contemporary price bracket. I hate that word in that sense because I feel like it's not the right way to describe it, but like they are, you know, affordable and maybe very democratic in that sense as well. I mean, of course, there's you know, I have a very skewed picture because I grew up in luxury, so I'm like, yeah, that's great price. So I do appreciate that some of the brands are still very, you know, expensive for certain people, but there is that stretch that you can do and you can buy into this look. So that is a consideration. Of course, saying that, I think, you know, recently, and particularly you can see it here in Denmark, a lot of the, you know, the big luxury brands has entered the market. And I think Denmark in itself has become such an amazing destination, partly because of its design, but beyond fashion. So, like, you know, you can see that at the moment, of course, it's 3 days of design, which is just a fantastic experience, and goes, you know, it's not actually fashion. It's a different kind of design, you know, furniture, textiles, everything, which is so beautiful. But also obviously the food scene. I mean, like there's more Michelin star restaurants per square meter in Copenhagen than anywhere else in the world. So people travel from all over the world. And I think that is also part of the understanding that your customer is not maybe, I mean, unless, of course, if you open up in like Aalborg or, you know, Borås or somewhere, then for sure it's going to be a very, you know, local client. But if you open in Copenhagen, even more so than Stockholm, you're going to have a client that comes in that, you know, might be American, they might be from China, they might be, you know, from London or wherever there are people that are traveling in. So you also kind of have to, you know, have an eye to not just cater for local and find that mix. Yeah, but in the end of the day, it's also like just I think people sometimes think because they're successful in one market or they're successful in one category, they can do another category or they can enter another market. And, without research, I mean, it's the same with buying. It was like, for me, it's like, know your numbers. It's like number one, you have to know the past to be able to like predict the future. But in the end, it's like your gut feeling as well, and how you present yourself, whether that is in this community building, that's definitely something to consider. But by really kind of coming in and having conversations, having local experts that can advise you, I think is absolutely key.
Like yesterday when I treated myself to one of these Michelin restaurants, recommended one. It was lunch, but I was sitting by the window, so I had this solid 2 hours just to do research and look at people. And what I was taken by, I think, as opposed to maybe London where I live or Italy where there is a more differences. Individuality stressed more explicitly, like with colors or with prints and patterns, where and when you need time to zoom in and then you start seeing the differences. It was really with fabrics, even though the cuts may be the same. It's a very pronounced but subtle differences, and a lot of them were centered around the choice of fabrics. If so many garments are colored black or browns, where is the difference? And I was wondering whether this is something that you also recognize, or if it's true that that textiles plays a crucial part in providing the differences or the novelty when presenting new collections.
I'll say from a buyer's perspective, I think especially here in Denmark, you said we have a long winter. A lot of colors aren't necessarily particularly flattering on white people in Denmark the majority of the year, which limits you to a certain color palette that works. And within that color palette, if you want to do something new, it is textiles that you're exploring. And I think that's always cool to see. Some brands, Stine Goya is a great example, does a lot of color and does it very well. Other brands are more curated in sticking to maybe a brown, black, gray, white sort of color palette. But yeah, you can be quite overwhelmed by the new textiles and textile innovations, which I also think is a great way of innovating. But yeah, I think it is something that we're particularly good at because we aren't limited, but in some ways we are a bit limited in our color palette, at least. Yeah.
But it's very like you dress for the weather, right? It's like a very Scandinavian way of like.
There's no bad weather, only bad dressing.
Exactly, it's a great saying, and it's a lot of layering.
Yeah,
because you can have. It's actually very similar to London in a sense, where you have like 4 seasons in one day. Which is what we've been having over the last few days, I think, as well.
Yes.
And do you think, like, if you like, we decided to call this project Weaving Futures for the centrality of fabrics in providing a level of a starting base, the foundation for sustainable practices within fashion. Perhaps there has been so much research into performative or natural fibers, and in all areas there can be sustainable approaches and there can be innovation. This is something that I always ask my students of, like,
what is cool.
Exactly.
What are the textiles of the future? Like, is there something that you can imagine?
It's a really good question. I think before we start looking into new textiles, I think we should learn how to handle the ones we already have. I had a great discussion with someone about sustainability within textiles. This problem of having mixed fabrics, if it's like a cotton poly blend that you can't recycle it as it is now. I know that there are some really cool technologies incoming that can separate these fibers, but for now it's really, really difficult or super expensive to do. So is it a more sustainable choice to pick something that's 100% polyester over something that's a cotton poly blend, perhaps, even though there's natural fibers in it? So I would maybe take a break, figure out what we have going on first, even though I know that's not possible. But yeah, I think that would be my preferred focus and what I hope for, and then we can have floating clothing in 50 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think I 100% agree with you. I think that's part of hopefully at least, I want to be optimistic. That is part of the world. It's how do we take part what we have and make it new and make it affordable? Because, to your point, it's very expensive today. But I think this also will be a continued innovation in exploring, natural resources or, even just going beyond that, as with obviously the dawn of the AI and, getting taken over by robots. I to me, it's quite fascinating. How will that affect also the production and design and even kind of going into what we actually put on our clothes. I don't know. I mean, so I think that the exciting thing is I have no idea, but what is here today is might not be here tomorrow, and I think that's part of the wonders of life.
It's so, my students, most of them usually they think futuristic. So they think, this kind of space age type of fabrics. And then I show them Metropolis. So this future that you're imagining is 100 years old. So actually being realistic is way more future forward thinking. It's one of my greatest favorite questions to ask. But I have one last question for you, because then we do have, unfortunately, to wrap up, because I'm loving this conversation, but we've talked about a lot of points in common, or there can be in common between Italy, Denmark, and the Nordic regions as well. Do you think are there any areas for potential that you think these industries could get together and provide new solutions or possibilities for the future? How do you see these agents collaborating?
I'm not sure how I mean, I wish I had the solution to it, but I hope that there will be more and more collaboration. I mean, and I think, for example, one project that Gani worked on, and it's obviously still continuing, but it was kind of going for something carbon neutral to carbon positive. But then instead of hiding that technology and keeping it to themselves, it's inviting everyone else to take part of it. And I think that's what I'm hoping for, that kind of collaboration that goes cross-brand, cross-borders, where people share. I think the more, it's the same with when I do mentoring. It's the more we can learn from each other, the more you can help someone else avoid that pitfall, that hurdle, or whatever it is. And I think, the more we can collaborate, let's be more like NASA, space collaboration, fabric collaboration. I think that would be fantastic. And I think actually what obviously the Italian Chamber of Trade Agency, thank you. Need to practice that one. That, what they're doing and what they're already doing is actually finding those partnerships and looking beyond the borders of Italy. And I think, hopefully that sort of will continue, and people will also kind of get excited about that and kind of move beyond that, so that it can be wider and, cross borders.
Yeah, and in fact, for example, as part of this project, what we are doing is we've partnered with NOM, so it's a Swedish manufacturing company. They're based in Borås, and they produce on demand. And then we partnered them with Anne-Marie Pacala, who's got a brand called Unmied, and they also produce on demand. The idea that they'll get their patterns, select Italian fabrics, produce in Borås for this market, and then try to reduce the impact, as well as using that stock fabrics or fabrics that are already in store, to avoid further production and only produce what's needed. And in fact, we'll be presenting the result of this collaboration at CIFF in August. So we'll see you there. Do you, Mike, also have some reflection on this kind of potential for the future?
I think also in a world where digitalization has become we can follow along any news story around the world, and we talked about it earlier as well, that the Scandinavian customer is very Scandinavian focused. I would love that we could introduce more Italian brands, more French brands, like more international brands to the scene, and have the Danes love it just as much as they do with their Danish brand. I love that we have this national pride, but it would be amazing if we could cross boundaries more with our representation in our brand portfolio.
Thank you so much, Ida and Mike, for this conversation. And thank you all for watching.
And thanks to CIFF for having us.
Yes.
And
Thank
to
you so
Matteo for curating so beautifully.